The horrors of trench warfare in World War I are somewhat reflected in the staggering casualties Canada suffered in that fight. 66,000 dead, more than 172,000 wounded. But gruesome, terrible injuries and death were not even the final miserable toll faced by those soldiers. Tim Cook is Chief Historian and Director of Research at the Canadian War Museum. His new book is called Lifesavers and Body Snatchers: Medical Care and the Struggle for Survival in the Great War, and it lays out the story. Tim Cook joins us now from the nation's capital. It's great to have you on our program again. Tim, I want to start right away by just going right into an excerpt from the book. If this doesn't bring home the hell of war, I don't know what will. It's an excerpt from the diary of a soldier about what he witnessed at his medical aid station during the Battle of Second Ypres in Belgium, 1915, and here we go. It was one never-ending stream which lasted all day and night for 7 days without cessation. In all, some 5,200 cases passed through our hands. Wounds here, wounds there, wounds everywhere. Legs, feet, hands missing, bleeding stumps controlled by rough field tourniquets. Large portions of the abdominal walls shot away, faces horribly mutilated, bones shattered to pieces, holes that you could put your clenched fist into, filled with dirt and mud, bits of equipment and clothing, until it all became like a hideous nightmare, as if we were living in the seventh hell of the damned. Here's a shot of some soldiers in one of those trenches, just a break in the war, I guess, at the moment. You know, I'm not sure this generation can appreciate it, Tim, but these are battles where thousands of people died in a single day. And half of all Canadian doctors and a third of Canadian nurses put on the uniform back then. I'd like you to start by telling us what it was like to be a medical professional dealing with this kind of carnage over and over and over.
Well, Steve, thanks for having me on the show again. And carnage is the right word there, I think. If we think of the Great War, the war of the trenches, where millions of soldiers were stuck below the ground, living a troglodyte existence in the dirt and the privation, the unburied corpses, the constant hellfire of shells exploding and machine guns, of shrapnel, of chemical agents. And as you gave indication there, just the horror of these wounds from modern weaponry, I think a horror that we can scarcely understand today. And for me, this is my 14th book of Canadian military history. I always rely heavily on the eyewitnesses to history, the soldiers, the airmen, the nurses, in this case, the doctors, the nurses and the soldiers of the Great War. They're all gone now, but I have spent years researching in the archives and libraries to, I guess, restore their voices to the history. And I really wanted to do that in this case to explore the medical war.
Well, if I may be permitted an observation, mission accomplished, Tim. I mean, their voices come out very strongly in this book. You have given them their voices for sure. And here's a shot, and once again, for those listening on podcast and can't see it, this is a stretcher bearer attending to a wounded soldier on the battlefield. You know, there were a lot of very bad, very dangerous jobs in this war. I'm not sure there was a worse one than a stretcher bearer. Would you tell us what that was?
Yeah, the stretcher bearer was, I think we would probably know the phrase today as a medic or a battlefield medic. In a battalion of 1,000 soldiers. And we should remember we had 620,000 Canadians who served in this war, about 350,000 serving overseas. And many of them were the medical services, as you've mentioned, 20,000 who served. And that included thousands of stretcher bearers whose job it was to race out into no man's land in the midst of the shell fire and the sweeping machine guns, sometimes wearing respirators to protect against chemical agents, and to look for those wounded soldiers who were shot through the gut or through the head, soldiers who had arms ripped off or were bleeding out on the battlefield. And it was a race against time. And these stretcher bearers were incredibly brave. They risked their lives. They would race over to a soldier. They would use his field bandage to try to wrap up his wound and to slow the bleeding. Often they had morphine tablets that they could give for the pain. The soldiers' letters, they talk about the wounded soldiers who survived. They talk about the relief of a cigarette, something that surprised me, but just that nicotine hit. And then the stretcher bearer, they raced off. with a word of good luck to that soldier. And that soldier really had two options. They could wait for a prisoner of war or perhaps a number of stretcher bearers to come together to carry them out, often through 2 to 3 kilometers of shell cratered, muddied battlefield with, of course, the shells still coming down. Or, and this was often the case, they somehow screwed up the courage. Somehow they overcame the pain and they crawled or they limped their way back to seek medical care. And I've read the stories of these soldiers, men who had legs blown off, who somehow were dragging themselves back, or soldiers whose entrails were literally hanging out of their bodies. And I've marveled and I've been horrified by that survival instinct. And I know, Steve, we've talked about this before for the Second World War and for Afghanistan, just the lengths that are sometimes unimaginable that is required to survive on the battlefield.
Here's a shot right here of those stretcher bearers you're talking about. Technological advances, of course, led to this is a weird way to put it, but ever better and more systemic ways of killing larger numbers of people in shorter periods of time. But it also led to life-saving innovation as well. Innovations born out of the battlefield. Maybe you could share some of those stories.
Yeah, well, the book's title is Lifesavers and Body Snatchers. And the first part of that, Lifesavers, captures, I think, that experience of care on the battlefield. The opening quotation you read of 5,200 wounded soldiers coming through a field ambulance in 1 week is astonishing. And so the waves of wounded soldiers just swept over the medical services, who were continually being overwhelmed in these big battles. And they had to engage in triage, deciding who to care for first, and sometimes who would be left to die. And a tremendous emotional burden there that maybe we can talk about later.
Here's a photo of soldiers laying wounded, injured in hospital.
When those wounded soldiers made their way back to the doctors, and again, as you said, a third of Canadian doctors served in this war, they underwent surgery. And at the start of the war, the wounds were simply mind-boggling. The surgeons were overwhelmed. They tried their best, but soldiers with gut wounds or in the abdominal area or the head, those were almost always lethal wounds. Broken femurs were almost always lethal as well, both from shock and blood loss, but also from infection, because this was a battlefield they were fighting on in France and in Belgium, which had been impregnated with animal and human feces for centuries. And so almost every wound was infected, and the surgeons had to deal with this. Eventually, they came to engage in new surgical techniques. One of them, debridement, which was to cut away vast parts of flesh and muscle. But there were other innovations as well. And by the latter part of the war, in 1917 and 1918, they were routinely saving soldiers who would have died at the beginning of the war. They did that through disease, in moving surgery forward, what we would think of today as more sort of forward surgical care, in forward MASH-like units. Incredible innovations in blood transfusions, which was a major Canadian innovation during the war, in facial reconstruction. And Steve, some of the images of soldiers who had their faces ripped apart are just gut-wrenching. I have a few in the book. I wasn't sure if I should include them in the book.
This is a soldier who was a victim of gas, and the gas attacks that you refer to in the book are just absolutely grisly.
I felt it was necessary to show that brutality of war. The innovations continue to X-rays that were used to locate metal in the body, as well as a host of other innovations.
Apropos of your last comment, I guess I didn't fully appreciate, but learned in your book, that we lost, well, everybody lost, far more service people to disease than to actually having been killed by the enemy. And of course, World War I takes place right in the midst of the Spanish flu, right? The first massive global pandemic of, I guess, the last century and change. How did fighting during the Spanish flu complicate the war?
Yeah, great question. And when I began to write this book in April of 2020, we remember that time of great fear and lockdown. And as a historian, I was reflecting back on the Great War, thinking about the Spanish flu and why we hadn't talked more about the Spanish flu, very similar to the virus that we are fighting and we're fighting in 2020, 21, and still to this day. The Spanish flu is a bit of a misnomer. It was called that because it was first alerted in Spain, which was neutral and didn't have the same propaganda and censorship laws. But that Spanish flu, the Canadians encountered it first, and it emerged first on the Western Front in June of 1918. And at that point, it wasn't the killer virus that it would become. It mutated, like we know so well, this virus that we are fighting to this day. And by September, it had become the killer virus that would surge around the world and kill at least 50 million people around the world, including 55,000 Canadians. And so, absolutely devastating. If we think of that virus, which really hit in three waves, and of course, we know only so well today the waves of viruses and the way they emerge. Its impact on the fighting, as your question, as you asked there, it did have an impact more on the German army, which was very much weakened at this point, had suffered several million casualties, and was struck very hard. But in my research in the book, at least 1,500 Canadians, 1,500 Canadians, were killed by the virus. And this is one of the areas where the medical services, the doctors, they didn't have a lot they could do. There really wasn't. They engaged in some of the preventative medicine that we do today, isolation, wearing masks. Of course, this is a war where we had vaccination for soldiers. A fascinating story I uncovered at the beginning of the war, where doctors said this will likely be a long war and a war of on the static nature. We need to vaccinate these soldiers. And there was quite an interesting debate in Canada, similar to what we have seen today, where the doctors say we simply must do this. And the army agreed to that. Many soldiers had never been vaccinated before. They were terrified if you read their letters, but it did save lives. And so to come back to your question about disease, the Canadians were better prepared than most at the start of the war, but there wasn't a lot that could be done with the Spanish flu and the virus of 1918 and 1919.
Tim, you raise a lot of very uncomfortable questions in the book. One of them is, did Canada traffic World War I soldiers' body parts? This is a very uncomfortable question, and I want to read another excerpt from your book, Lifesavers and Body Snatchers, as we delve into this. I lie here, mother, but victory is ours. This was the epitaph chosen by the parents of Private Thomas Mack, who was killed at age 24. The creation of the overseas cemeteries was comforting to some grieving Canadians who took solace in knowing that their sons and daughters, uncles, aunts, and fathers would be buried forever with their comrades, frequently described as, quote, glorious dead. This silent army would forever be a reminder of the cost of the war, and yet some Canadians were deliberately buried with their bodies missing organs. Medical officers had cut up the soldiers, extracting organs and bones as teaching specimens and museological oddities. Okay, what? I mean, during your research for this book, you discovered that hundreds of Canadian soldiers' organs and skeletal remains were extracted, traded, even put on display. Why in heaven's name was this done?
Well, Steve, this is a medical mystery I've been running to get ground for about 10 years. And the second part of the book title, Lifesavers and Body Snatchers, that's what the Body Snatchers refers to. Years and years ago, I uncovered some evidence that there were being autopsies behind the line. I thought, isn't that interesting? In this maelstrom of destruction with thousands of soldiers being killed, there were doctors behind the lines conducting autopsies on the slain soldiers. And they were doing that, of course, to try to understand what had killed them and then how to save their lives. But as I began to read about that, I saw a hint that maybe they were extracting body parts. And I thought that just can't be the case, Steve. I mean, we're coming up to Remembrance Day, a time where the fallen, we sanctify them, where we commemorate and mark their loss. how could doctors have been extracting body parts? So I spent years looking for the evidence at the National Archives in downtown Ottawa. I eventually found the files. They were misnamed and they were where they shouldn't have been logically, but I did find them. And it revealed what I had thought, that doctors harvested Canadian soldiers' body parts. It was part of a British official program, part of the learning process of these doctors to better understand the soldiers. And yet, this has never been told before. It's not part of our memory. It's not in any history book. And it is completely shocking. I mean, these were slain Canadian soldiers, fathers, brothers, uncles, and sons who served for king and country, who fought in what was then a just war to liberate Western Europe. And when they were killed, their body parts were removed, brains with bullet holes, lungs burned out by mustard gas, shattered femurs. They were removed and then put in a museum in London. And then, even more shockingly, 799 body parts were eventually brought back to Canada.
Well, let me follow up with that. And we've been showing pictures from your book throughout our conversation here. Sheldon, middle of page 6. Let's bring up picture number 11 here, because there was an exhibit of these body parts for surgeons in 1920 in Montreal. There was even a public exhibit in Hamilton in 1918. This is while the war is on. Major interest from residents when that one happened. Prime Minister Borden apparently checked them out at one point. Why was there no outrage about this?
Steve, I've been studying the First World War for 25 years, and I don't know. This is shocking. I simply could not believe what I was reading in the files, that these hundreds of body parts came back to Canada, as you say, put on display in Hamilton, where thousands of members of the public lined up for hours to see them. And the journalists of the day wrote about the gawking public and how interested they were to see these body parts of Canadian and British soldiers. And as you show there, the photographic evidence of how they were put on display. And as I write in the book, I think it shakes my confidence in how we think about those fallen soldiers. Now, I think one way to think about it and one way to situate it is that there was a constant learning process that occurred during the war. For the fighting forces, they learned to fight more effectively, combined arms warfare, the application of firepower, small unit tactics. For the medical services, as we've talked about, there was an evolution in medical treatment that saved lives. There were lectures behind the lines. John McCrae, the famous poet, was a medical officer. He was a great authority in teaching behind the lines, as were many others. They used these body parts as part of that teaching specimen and as samples. And yet, how could this have happened? 800 body parts coming back to Canada as medical specimens for a museum that was to be built in Ottawa. It never was. And I think what it illustrates is that the fallen soldiers had not yet been sanctified by the end of the war, or even in the first years after the war, 1919 and 1920. In the book, I do talk about a turning point. It's 1922. At this point, the government has already given $10,000 for these body parts to be cataloged and put on display. But then there are a series of memos in the archives where senior medical officers at the Department of National Defense, or what will become D&D, they realize that something's very wrong. They realize they should not have these body parts, because what is happening in Canada at that point is we are building thousands of memorials to the fallen. In every city, town, and village, we are building memorials. That's the time when we decide to build Vimy Ridge, where our national memorial, they begin to build that in 1925. And there's a sea change that happens, and D&D walks back from these medical specimens, as they call them, and realize they do not want them. And they are sent to McGill University, where, somewhat incredibly, they will stay there for the next 30 years until they are unceremoniously destroyed in the late 1950s.
Tim, in our remaining few moments here, I want to, how do I put this? Well, I want to take advantage of the fact that, of our friendship to talk about something that is, well, I think Don Cherry would say you're going through a tough time right now. I think that's the way he would put it. And we talked 10 years ago on this program about the fact that you dealt with cancer back in 2012. And I guess you thought you had it nipped in the bud. And despite the energetic presence that you have on this program tonight, I gather it's back. What's going on, my friend?
It is, and thanks, Steve. Thanks for asking. Yeah, 10 years ago, we talked about that, and I went through a battle with cancer, long, heavy, punishing, multiple rounds of chemo, radiation, 2 stem cell transplants. It was actually the point where I began to think about writing a book on war and medicine, because I met so many doctors and oncologists who had a good sense of their own history, including several doctors who studied military history. And I found that interesting. I asked one of them, and they said, it's about the closest thing we have to the trauma that we often face and the emotional burden that they faced. I thought it was behind me. Alas, this summer, a new cancer emerged, and I have fought that with chemo, radiation, back in the medical system, seeing the incredible care of doctors and nurses who feature prominently in my book as well, for how they care for patients and the emotional burden that they often had to take on themselves as these young men died, often whispering their mothers' names. And that has been a struggle that I've passed through, including major surgery. I wish I was actually in the studio with you, but I've been unable to travel. But I hope maybe with the next book or some other time, I'll be there with you, and this will be a struggle that will be behind me. I'm a historian for 25 years. I'm a writer. I do this because it keeps me going. This is how I deal in this particular case with the unknowable and the stress and facing my own mortality. I reflect on those young men and women who have faced death in countless ways in our history. And I never think that I'm a soldier at Dieppe or in a Lancaster or fighting on the Somme. I know the difference there. But I do take some inspiration from the words of those Canadians much younger than myself who have faced their own mortality in the past. And that is one way that I keep going. And throughout this process, I have continued to read and to write when I could, because that's who I am. That's how I continue to move forward. And perhaps it gives me some hope in realizing that there will be another side, and I will be on it.
Brilliantly said. I can't wish you enough good fortune to get through this latest chapter of your life in good health and coming out the other side. And in the meantime, we are happy to remind people of your latest contribution to the military history of this country, which you are, one of the most significant contributors to of all time. Lifesavers and body snatchers, medical care, and the struggle for survival in the Great War. And we are so glad it has brought Tim Cook to our program tonight. Be well, Tim, and until next time.
Thank you so much.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.